Once, people only heard the world through the crackling sound of the radio, a voice in the dark carrying news of wars, victories, and disasters. But what if you could not just hear it? What if you could read it, hold it in your hands, and later see it with a click online? Most never imagined it, yet some men did, and they built something that went far beyond radio broadcasts or fleeting rumors. They created a platform that didn't just tell stories, but uncovered truths. It started as nothing more than ink pressed on fragile paper, a whisper in the crowded streets of New York. But whispers grew into voices, and voices became a roar. With each headline, it pierced through the noise, exposing scandals that shook presidents, uncovering secrets governments wanted buried, and reporting on wars that defined generations. Its rise was never without sacrifice. Near bankruptcies nearly silenced its presses. Critics branded it biased, too powerful, too dangerous. Yet every downfall only sharpened its edge. From radio waves to paper, from print to pixels, from local columns to global dominance, it reinvented itself again and again. It became an empire trusted, feared, questioned, and revered. This is not just the story of ink and paper. This is the story of Henry Jarvis Raymond, George Jones, and the empire they built, the New York Times. But their journey wasn't easy. Betrayal, bankruptcy, and battles that nearly destroyed everything they built. Stay until the end to discover how they survived it all. Henry Jarvis Raymond was born on January 24, 1820, in Lima, New York, into a modest farming family. His father died when he was only 9, forcing him to balance hard farm work with his love for books. Raymond enrolled at the University of Vermont, where he quickly stood out for his debating skills and polished writing. Graduating with honors in 1840, he saw journalism not just as a career, but as a weapon for truth and democracy. By the 1840s, Raymond was making a name as a journalist at Horace Greeley's Tribune, earning respect for his sharp editorials and political insight. He dreamed of founding a newspaper that could rise above the noise of partisanship and sensationalism. Meanwhile, George Jones, born in 1811 in East Poultney, Vermont, was building a very different path. Raised in poverty and left fatherless at a young age, Jones could not afford higher education. Instead, he trained as a printer's apprentice and later as a bookkeeper, developing strong financial discipline. By the 1840s, he was known in New York publishing circles as a man of steady judgment and honesty. The two men met in New York City, where Raymond's editorial brilliance and Jones's business sense formed a natural alliance. In 1851, pooling resources and investors, they founded the New York Daily Times, later shortened to the New York Times. From the beginning, the paper stood apart. It covered the slavery debates and later the Civil War with balance and depth. During the violent New York draft riots of 1863, mobs tried to storm the newsroom for its anti-slavery stance, but the staff defended it with Gatling guns, a moment that cemented the paper's resolve. Raymond died suddenly in 1869, leaving the future of the Times uncertain. The newspaper everyone thought would collapse was about to face its greatest test. What happened next shocked the entire nation. At that moment, George Jones stepped into leadership. In 1871, he made the defining choice of his career. When confronted with bribes from William Boss Tweed and his Tammany Hall machine, Jones refused the money and published the evidence of corruption. The exposé helped bring down Tweed and gave the Times a reputation for fearless integrity. By the time Jones died in 1891, he had ensured the survival of the paper through discipline and honesty. What began with the son of a farmer and the son of a struggling Vermont family had become a powerful institution, a newspaper that would soon be known worldwide as the New York Times. When George Jones passed away in 1891, the New York Times had integrity but little financial strength. By the mid-1890s, it was losing money and its very survival was in doubt. And just when it seemed like the end, a 19-year-old with only $250 in his pocket stepped forward. No one believed he could save it, but what he did next changed journalism forever. Adolph Simon Ochs was born in 1858 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to German Jewish immigrant parents, and grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. At just 19, he borrowed $250 to buy the struggling Chattanooga Times. This reputation for rescuing newspapers caught national attention. That changed in 1896, when a young Tennessee publisher named Adolph Ochs stepped in and bought the struggling paper. Ochs brought a clear vision: strip away sensationalism, restore credibility, and win readers with trust. To symbolize this mission, he printed a new motto on the front page, words that remain to this day: all the news that's fit to print. And by 1918, the Times won its first Pulitzer Prize for coverage of World War I. Under Ochs, the paper expanded its scope: the Sunday magazine, the book review, and cultural features that gave the Times authority far beyond daily headlines. Through the Great Depression and World War II, the paper chronicled crises with unmatched detail, strengthening its claim as America's newspaper of record. By the 1950s and 1960s, its influence was global. Coverage of the Civil Rights Movement, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and the growing conflict in Vietnam shaped how Americans and the world understood history as it unfolded. By the late 1960s, the Times was no longer just a newspaper, it was an institution. But as the nation entered the turbulent 1970s, the paper itself would be tested like never before. By the early 1970s, the New York Times was already America's newspaper of record. But in 1971, it took a daring step that would define its place in history. The paper published the Pentagon Papers, a classified government study exposing the truth about the Vietnam War. When the Nixon administration tried to silence the Times, the case went to the Supreme Court. In a landmark ruling, the court sided with the newspaper, a victory that cemented the Times as a fearless defender of press freedom and a watchdog of democracy. Yet by the 1990s, cracks appeared. Declining advertising revenues, newsroom layoffs, and public criticism weakened its aura. Rivals such as the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the Washington Post pushed harder, while editorial controversies raised questions about whether the Times was losing touch with its readers. Then came the digital storm of the 2000s. The internet revolution shook the foundations of print journalism, and the Times was no exception. Circulation dropped sharply, advertising collapsed, and survival was in question. In 2006, the paper formally launched New York Times Digital LLC, but the transition was rocky. By the time of the 2008 financial crisis, losses mounted, staff were cut, and in 2009, the company had to seek emergency loans just to stay afloat. The answer emerged in the 2010s. Instead of surrendering, the Times reinvented itself. In 2011, it introduced a bold experiment: the digital paywall. Critics scoffed, predicting no one would pay for online news. But the gamble worked. Digital subscriptions surged, revenues stabilized, and the paper built a new future. From there, the Times transformed into a multimedia empire. It expanded beyond print into podcasts, apps, video, and streaming. To further strengthen its digital empire, the Times acquired influential media ventures: Wirecutter Incorporated, a trusted product review site; Serial Productions LLC, creators of the hit true crime podcast Serial; The Athletic Media Company, a sports journalism powerhouse with global reach. By the end of the decade, the New York Times had become a digital-first brand with millions of paying subscribers worldwide. Its operations and bureaus spanned continents from London, Paris, and Madrid to Hong Kong, Tokyo, Singapore, India, Brazil, and Canada. What had once been a struggling print paper was now a diversified empire of journalism, scarred by crises, sharpened by competition, but stronger than ever as it led the digital age into the 21st century. By the dawn of the 2010s, the New York Times was standing at a crossroads. Print advertising, once its lifeline, had collapsed. The newsroom was tense, caught between the traditions of print and the uncertainties of a digital-first world. In 2011, the Times took a gamble that would define its future: the launch of a metered paywall. At first, the idea was ridiculed. Why would anyone pay for online news when so much was free? But within months, the skeptics were silenced. The years that followed became a period of bold experimentation. In 2013, the paper launched NYT Now, a mobile app aimed at younger, mobile-first audiences. That same year marked a historic milestone. Jill Abramson became the Times' first female executive editor. Her tenure, however, was short-lived.
And finally tonight, a conversation with Jill Abramson, named today to be the executive editor of the New York Times, the first woman to hold the top news position at the time.
In 2014, the Times also proved the power of its real-time digital reporting during the East Harlem building collapse, when a gas explosion killed 8 people and destroyed 2 apartment buildings.
Tonight, the NYPD says a total of 8 are confirmed dead. Crews are using tiny cameras and sound-detecting tools, hoping to find someone alive.
The newsroom mobilized instantly with live updates, photographs, videos, and eyewitness accounts flowing through its website and social media. She was abruptly dismissed in a move that shocked the newsroom and sparked debate about gender and leadership in the media. She was replaced by Dean Baquet, who made history as the first African-American to hold the position. Though Baquet faced controversy, his leadership helped steady the newsroom in turbulent times. In 2015, the Times ventured into immersive storytelling with the launch of NYTVR, experimenting with virtual reality as a way to tell stories beyond the printed page. By 2017, the Times had surpassed 2 million digital subscribers, a milestone once thought impossible. That same year, it launched The Daily, a podcast hosted by Michael Barbaro that quickly became one of the most influential voices in modern journalism. By 2018, the transformation was undeniable. Digital subscriptions crossed 3 million. The newsroom expanded its international bureaus and investigative teams, and multimedia storytelling became the new norm. Coverage of the Mueller investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election further solidified the Times' reputation as America's most influential newsroom. From near collapse in the early 2000s to record-breaking growth by 2018, the Times had redefined itself. No longer just a newspaper, it had become a global, digital-first media empire, trusted by millions, questioned by many, but impossible to ignore. By 2019, the New York Times had crossed the final threshold. It was no longer just a newspaper, it was a digital empire. Subscriptions climbed into the millions, powered by investigative scoops, a booming podcast division, and a multimedia newsroom. Then came 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic upended the world, and the Times became its chronicler. Interactive infection maps, policy explainers, and real-time updates turned it into a global lifeline. Millions checked its reporting daily, pushing subscriptions past 5 million. By 2021, growth meant expansion. The daily podcast dominated audio journalism, while the acquisition of serial productions brought award-winning storytelling under its umbrella. In 2022, the Times made its boldest gamble, spending $550 million on The Athletic, a sports outlet with hundreds of global reporters. For the first time, the Times became a major force in sports journalism, drawing in millions of new readers far beyond politics and culture. By 2023, subscriptions surged past 9 million, yet competition was fiercer than ever. Independent newsletters on Substack, rapid-fire outlets like Axios, and AI-driven platforms challenged its dominance. Critics asked, was the New York Times still reporting the news or shaping the debate itself? Then came 2024. Artificial intelligence entered the newsroom, threatening to generate articles faster than humans. The Times responded with lawsuits against tech giants, accusing them of exploiting its archives to train AI models.
The New York Times has filed a federal lawsuit against OpenAI and Microsoft. The Times is seeking to end the practice of using its stories to train chatbots.
By 2025, the New York Times stood as both a triumph and a paradox. Its empire now spanned investigative reporting, consumer advice through Wirecutter, sports coverage via The Athletic, and cultural dominance in audio with The Daily and Serial. And the question was no longer whether it could survive, but whether anyone could ever challenge it. But there's one secret they've been hiding, one decision that could either secure their throne forever or bring the empire crashing down, and we'll reveal it right now. From a farmer's son with only determination and a small-town bookkeeper with nothing but discipline rose a newspaper that became a global empire. From the streets of New York to the halls of power in Washington, the New York Times has exposed truths that governments tried to bury. It has been celebrated with Pulitzers, attacked with cries of fake news, nearly broken by financial storms, and reborn in the digital age. And now, as it battles the age of algorithms and artificial intelligence, one thing is clear: its story is still being written. The next chapter may yet be its most defining. But here's what most people don't know behind this empire: there's a hidden battle happening right now. A battle with AI, with competitors, and with the truth itself. The New York Times is at a crossroads, and what happens next could change journalism forever.